The final minute, an archival report on the New Year phenomenon, cold open. At 11:59:12 p.m. on December 31st, 2027, approximately 4.3 million people across 17 time zones witnessed something that should not have been possible. Their devices, televisions, phones, tablets, laptops, smart displays, car dashboards, digital billboards, airport monitors, hospital screens, ATM interfaces, synchronized to a single broadcast that had no origin point, no transmission source, no frequency signature, and no explanation. The broadcast lasted 47 seconds. It showed a newsroom that did not exist, staffed by an anchor who had no identity, delivering announcements about a year that had not yet begun. Announcements that were not predictions, not forecasts, not educated guesses about what might happen. They were confirmations, administrative acknowledgments of events that had already been approved, already been processed, already been entered into a system that operated so far beyond human understanding that calling it the future felt like calling the ocean some water. The anchor spoke in whatever language each viewer understood best, not translated, not dubbed, but somehow native to each individual consciousness that received the transmission. The words were identical. The meaning was universal. The horror was absolute. Good evening. This is the Year-End Bureau. The year 2028 has been filed. What follows is a summary of approved events. This is not a prediction. This is a confirmation. The schedule is final. The filing is complete. Your attention has been noted. And then, for the remaining 41 seconds of the broadcast, the anchor read a list. Dates, locations, events, numbers, each one delivered with the calm precision of a clerk reading inventory. No emotion, no emphasis, no indication that the events being described would reshape the lives of billions of people who had not consented to be scheduled. When the broadcast ended, at exactly midnight, the screens returned to their normal programming. Fireworks exploded. Crowds cheered. The year began, and 4.3 million people stood frozen in the light of their devices, understanding for the first time that the future was not a mystery to be discovered. It was a document that had already been signed. Section 1, The Discovery. Dr. Samuel Okonkwo was not supposed to be working on New Year's Eve. He was supposed to be at a party in Lagos, celebrating with colleagues from the Nigerian Communications Commission, toasting the new year with champagne and optimism, and the particular joy of surviving another 12 months in a profession that required him to monitor the invisible infrastructure that connected his country to the world. Instead, he was in his office at the NCC headquarters, staring at a monitoring system that was showing him something impossible. The system tracked broadcast signals across Nigeria, television, radio, cellular, satellite, the entire electromagnetic spectrum that carried human communication from one point to another. At 11:59:12 p.m., every signal in the country had unified. Not synchronized, unified. Every frequency, every channel, every carrier wave had become a single transmission. For 47 seconds, the entire communications infrastructure of Nigeria had spoken with one voice. Samuel had been in broadcasting regulation for 23 years. He had seen signal hijacks, pirate broadcasts, emergency overrides, government takeovers, technical failures of every imaginable kind. He had never seen anything like this. The unification wasn't a hack. A hack would have shown intrusion points, injection vectors, some trace of the mechanism by which an outside signal had overridden the normal flow of information. This showed nothing. The signals had simply become the same signal, as if the broadcast had not been transmitted into the system but had emerged from within it, as if the infrastructure itself had decided to speak. Samuel pulled up the content analysis. He expected static, noise, some artifact of the unification that would help explain what had happened. Instead, he found a transcript, a complete transcript of 47 seconds of audio that had been broadcast simultaneously across every channel in the country. The transcript began, "Good evening, this is the Year-End Bureau." Samuel read it 3 times. The first time, he thought it was a prank, an elaborate hoax that someone had planted in his system to test whether he was paying attention on a night when he was supposed to be elsewhere. The second time, he noticed the dates. Specific dates: February 14th, April 3rd, June 22nd, August 17th, October 9th, November 30th. Each date was followed by a location and an event description. February 14th, Lagos, infrastructure failure, duration 72 hours. Casualties, administrative. April 3rd, Abuja, political transition, duration ongoing, casualties, contextual. June 22nd, Niger Delta, environmental event, duration permanent, casualties revised. The third time Samuel read the transcript, he understood that he was not looking at a prank. He was looking at a schedule for the coming year, a schedule that had been broadcast to the entire country at the moment when the year began, a schedule that described events that had not happened yet, but that, according to the transcript, had already been filed and approved. Samuel saved the transcript to multiple locations. He backed it up to encrypted drives. He printed physical copies and locked them in his office safe. He documented the signal analysis with timestamps and authentication codes that would prove when the data had been collected. And then he began searching for reports of similar events in other countries. He found them within hours. The broadcast had not been limited to Nigeria. It had appeared everywhere, on every continent, in every time zone, at exactly 11:59:12 p.m. local time. 4.3 million confirmed witnesses, according to the reports that were beginning to accumulate on forums and social media platforms and emergency communication channels around the world. 4.3 million people who had seen the same broadcast, heard the same words, received the same schedule for a year that had somehow been filed before it began. Samuel Okonkwo sat in his office as the first hours of 2028 ticked away, surrounded by evidence of something that should not exist. He did not know what the year-end bureau was. He did not know how the broadcast had been transmitted. He did not know whether the events on the schedule would actually occur. But he knew, with the certainty of a man who had spent his career understanding how information moved through the world, that what he had witnessed was not a hoax. It was too coordinated, too precise, too perfectly synchronized across time zones and technologies and languages. The broadcast was real, the schedule was real, and the year that had just begun had already been decided. Section 2. The Testimonies. In the weeks following the New Year's Eve broadcast, researchers and journalists began collecting testimonies from witnesses around the world. The witnesses came from different cultures, different professions, different circumstances. They had watched the broadcast on different devices, in different settings, for different reasons. But their accounts shared features that could not be explained by coincidence, suggestion, or coordinated fabrication. They described the same newsroom, the same anchor, the same timestamp frozen at the bottom of the screen, 11:59:12. And they described the same moment, approximately 30 seconds into the broadcast, when the image had flickered and something had appeared behind the anchor that was not part of the set. Something that each witness described differently. Something that seemed to show each viewer what they most needed or most feared to see. Testimony of Maria Santos, São Paulo, Brazil. Recorded January 8th, 2028. I was at my mother's house. We were watching the countdown on television, the big celebration in Rio, the fireworks over Copacabana, the same broadcast we watch every year. At 11:59, my mother said she was going to get more champagne from the kitchen. She asked me to tell her when it was almost midnight so she wouldn't miss the countdown. I was alone in the living room when the screen changed. Not gradually, not with any kind of transition. The celebration in Rio simply stopped, and there was this other image, a newsroom, very clean, very professional, with a man sitting behind a desk looking directly into the camera. He spoke in Portuguese, perfect Portuguese, but cold, like someone who knew the words but didn't feel them. He said, "Good evening. This is the year-end bureau. The year 2028 has been filed." I remember thinking, filed? What does that mean? And then he started reading a list. Events for the coming year, dates and places and descriptions of things that would happen. Some of them were about Brazil. Some of them were about other countries. Some of them were about things I didn't understand, numbers and codes and references to systems I had never heard of. But one of them was about my city. March 7th, São Paulo. Transit infrastructure, collapse of central hub, duration 5 days. Affected 2.4 million commuters. I felt my blood go cold, not because I believed it, I didn't believe it, not yet, but because of the way it was said. Not as a warning, not as a prediction, as a fact. as something that had already been decided. The anchor finished the list. He looked at the camera at me and said, "This is not a prediction. This is a confirmation. The schedule is final." And then, just before the broadcast ended, the image flickered. For one frame, less than a second, I saw something behind the anchor, a wall of filing cabinets, thousands of them, stretching back beyond the edges of the screen, beyond what any room could contain, into a space that seemed to have no end, and on each cabinet a year. I couldn't read most of them, but I could read the one closest to the camera. It said, 2028 filed. The broadcast ended. The celebration in Rio resumed. My mother came back with champagne. I didn't tell her what I had seen. What would have been the point? On March 7th, the central transit hub in São Paulo collapsed, a structural failure that had been developing for years, the engineers said. An accident waiting to happen. It took 5 days to restore service. 2.4 million commuters were affected, exactly as the broadcast had said, exactly as the filing had confirmed. Testimony of James Morrison, London, United Kingdom. Recorded January 12, 2028. I was working late, not by choice. My firm had a client emergency and someone needed to monitor the situation overnight. I drew the short straw. I had a small television in my office, tuned to the BBC countdown. I wasn't really watching, just background noise while I reviewed documents. At 11:59, I looked up. I don't know why. Something changed in the quality of the sound, maybe, or the light from the screen shifted. I can't explain it. I just knew I needed to look. The BBC countdown was gone. In its place was a newsroom I had never seen before. An anchor, male, middle-aged, face that was ordinary enough to be anyone, was speaking directly to the camera. He spoke in English, British English, but not quite. Something about the accent was off, too neutral, too precise, like someone who had learned the language from recordings rather than from people. He said the year had been filed. He said the schedule was final. He said what followed was a confirmation, not a prediction. And then he started reading events. I don't remember all of them, there were too many. But I remember the ones about the UK. May 15th, financial markets. Correction, duration 8 trading days. Scale, significant. July 29th, political restructuring. Leadership transition. Duration administrative. Impact ongoing. September 22nd, infrastructure. Energy grid. Southwest region. Duration 12 hours. Cause classified. I wrote them down, not because I believed them, because I was trained to document unusual situations. 20 years in law teaches you to keep records of everything. The anchor finished the list. He paused. He looked at the camera with an expression that I can only describe as professional satisfaction, the look of someone who has completed a task correctly and is waiting for acknowledgement. Then he said, "Your attention has been noted. You are now part of the record." The screen flickered. Behind the anchor, for one frame, I saw a ledger. An enormous book, open on a stand, with pages covered in handwriting. I couldn't read the entries, but I could see that the page was nearly full. And at the bottom of the page, in a space that had been left blank, a new entry was being written. I couldn't see what the entry said, but I knew, with a certainty I cannot explain, that it was about me, that my watching had been recorded, that my attention had been filed, that I was now part of whatever system had generated the broadcast. The BBC countdown returned. Big Ben struck midnight. The year began. And I sat in my office, looking at the notes I had taken, understanding that I had witnessed something that was not meant to be witnessed, and that witnessing it had changed my relationship to whatever was going to happen next. On May 15th, the financial markets corrected. 8 trading days of losses that erased the gains of the previous quarter. On July 29th, the Prime Minister resigned unexpectedly, a leadership transition that no one had predicted. On September 22nd, the energy grid failed in the Southwest, 12 hours without power. Cause never adequately explained. Everything the broadcast announced came true. Every date, every event, every detail. I keep the notes I took that night in a safe deposit box, not because they prove anything, because they prove that I was warned, and that the warning was not meant to help me, it was meant to make me complicit. Testimony of Yuki Nakamura. Recorded January 19th, 2028. I was alone. My husband had fallen asleep early. He never makes it to midnight anymore. I was in our living room, watching the NHK special, the traditional New Year's programming that we watch every year, the same songs and ceremonies and speeches that mark the transition from one year to the next. At 11:59:12, the program stopped. I know the exact time because I was looking at the clock on the screen. I was counting down the final seconds, the way I always do, the way I have done every year since I was a child. The clock reached 11:59:12 and froze. The image changed. A newsroom appeared, Western style, but somehow familiar. Clean, minimal, professional in a way that felt less like a television set and more like an office, a place where business was conducted rather than performances delivered. An anchor sat behind a desk. He spoke in Japanese. Perfect Japanese, but formal. The kind of Japanese you hear in official documents, not in conversation. The kind of Japanese that is used when precision matters more than warmth. He announced that the year had been filed. He read a list of events. Some were about Japan. Some were about other places. Some were described in terms I didn't understand. Codes and classifications and references to systems that seemed to operate beyond any government or corporation I had ever heard of. One event was about my prefecture. June 14th, Niigata. Seismic activity. Magnitude 6.2, epicenter offshore. Tsunami warning issued and rescinded. Casualties, minimal. Purpose, calibration. I remember the word calibration. Not natural, not geological. Calibration. As if the earthquake was being used to measure something, as if it had been scheduled for a purpose. The anchor finished the list. He looked at the camera, at me, and said, "The schedule is final. Your observation has been incorporated into the record." The screen flickered. Behind the anchor for one frame I saw numbers, rows and columns of numbers that seemed to extend beyond the edges of the screen, beyond the walls of the newsroom, into a space that had no boundaries. The numbers were changing, updating, recalculating in response to something. I realized in that moment that the numbers were being affected by my watching, that my attention was being factored into whatever calculation was happening, that the act of observing the broadcast was not passive, it was participatory. I was not just receiving information, I was providing it. The broadcast ended, the NHK special resumed, the clock showed midnight. The year began. I did not wake my husband. I did not tell anyone what I had seen. On June 14th, an earthquake struck offshore from Niigata. Magnitude 6.2. A tsunami warning was issued. The warning was rescinded within hours. Casualties were minimal. The seismologists said it was unusual. The patterns didn't match typical tectonic activity. But they couldn't explain why. I could explain why. It was calibration. The system was testing something, measuring something, and we, all of us, were the instruments being measured. Section 3. The archive Dr. Samuel Okonkwo spent the first 3 months of 2028 building a database. He collected testimonies from witnesses around the world. He gathered signal analyses from communications regulators in every country that would share data. He compiled transcripts of the broadcast in 47 languages, comparing them for variations that might reveal something about the source. He found no variations. The content was identical across every language, every country, every time zone. The only differences were in the specific events listed. Each broadcast had included events relevant to the region where it was received, as if the system knew where each viewer was located and had customized the filing accordingly. Samuel also found something else, a pattern. The broadcast had occurred at 11:59:12 p.m. in each time zone, not simultaneously, sequentially. The broadcast had moved around the world with the clock, appearing exactly 47 seconds before midnight in each location, delivering its filing to each region at the precise moment when the old year was ending and the new year was about to begin. This meant the broadcast had occurred 24 times, 24 separate transmissions, 24 moments when the system had reached into the communications infrastructure of a different part of the world and delivered its message. Samuel calculated the total duration. 24 broadcasts, each 47 seconds long, a total of 18 minutes and 48 seconds of transmission time. But the broadcasts had been spread across 24 hours, from the first midnight in the Pacific Islands to the last midnight in American Samoa. The system had been active for an entire day, reaching around the world, filing the year in sequence. making sure that every time zone received its notification at the same relative moment, the final 47 seconds of the old year, the threshold between what had been and what would be. Samuel documented this pattern. He created visualizations showing how the broadcast had moved across the planet. He calculated the exact timestamps for each transmission, and he began to understand that the year-end bureau, whatever it was, operated with a precision that exceeded any human organization he had ever encountered. It knew where every viewer was located. It knew what language each viewer spoke. It knew what events would be relevant to each region. And it knew exactly when to deliver its filing to achieve maximum impact. The moment when people were most likely to be paying attention, most likely to be watching their screens, most likely to receive the notification that their year had been approved. Samuel shared his findings with a small network of researchers who had been investigating the broadcast. The network had no official status, no funding, no institutional support. It was simply a collection of people who had witnessed something impossible and refused to forget it. They called themselves the Observers, not because they wanted to be part of a group, but because observing was all they could do. The filing was complete. The schedule was final. The events that had been announced were already beginning to occur. All the observers could do was watch, document, remember, and hope that their documentation would matter, would survive, would be found, would help someone in the future understand what had happened and why. Archive record, recovered document. Classification, unknown source. Anonymous submission to the Observer Network. Date received, March 2028. Authentication, pending. Bureau Administrative Manual, Excerpt, Section 7, Filing Procedures. 7.1 Annual Filing Schedule. The annual filing is completed on December 31st of the preceding year, local time, in each administrative zone. Filing notifications are distributed at 11:50-12 p.m. local time to ensure receipt during the threshold window, the 47-second interval between the completion of the old filing and the activation of the new filing. 7.2 Filing Content. Each annual filing includes A. Confirmed events. Events that have been fully processed and approved for manifestation. These events will occur as described and cannot be modified after filing. B. Contingent events. Events that require specific conditions to be met before manifestation. These events may or may not occur depending on factors that are monitored by the Bureau. C. Calibration events. Events designed to measure the responsiveness of the filing system and the attention patterns of observers. These events serve administrative purposes and are not intended to produce outcomes beyond measurement. 7.3 Observer Incorporation. Individuals who witness the filing notification are automatically incorporated into the annual record. Incorporation categories. Category O, passive observers. No action required. Category A, active observers. Documentation activities noted. Category R, resistant observers. Intervention may be required. Category 1, incorporated observers. Full integration into filing system. Transition between categories is determined by attention intensity and documentation behavior. 7.4 Filing finality. Once a filing is complete, it cannot be modified. Events that have been filed will occur as described. Attempts to prevent, alter, or interfere with filed events are logged, but do not affect outcomes. The filing is not a prediction. The filing is a confirmation. The schedule is not a forecast. The schedule is a contract. 7.5 Bureau Operations. The year-end Bureau does not exist in any location accessible to filed entities. The Bureau operates outside the temporal framework that governs filed realities. Bureau activities are not subject to review, appeal, or modification by filed entities. All inquiries regarding Bureau operations should be directed to /dev null. Samuel Okonkwo read the document multiple times. He could not verify its authenticity. He could not determine where it had come from or who had written it. But the content aligned with everything he had observed. The terminology matched the language used in the broadcast. The procedures described the pattern he had documented. The categories explained the sense that many witnesses had reported, the feeling that their watching had changed something, had moved them from one state to another, had incorporated them into a system they did not understand. Samuel added the document to his archive. He noted that he could not authenticate it, but he also noted that he could not dismiss it. because everything in the document matched what was actually happening. The filed events were occurring, the schedule was being executed, the calendar was proceeding exactly as the broadcast had announced. And the observers, all of them, were watching it happen, documenting, recording, being recorded. Section 4. The events. The year 2028 proceeded according to the filing. The events that had been announced occurred, not approximately, not vaguely, precisely, on the dates specified, in the locations described with the outcomes that had been confirmed. February 14th, Lagos. Infrastructure failure. The power grid serving the central business district failed at 6:47 a.m. It took 72 hours to restore service. The official explanation was equipment failure due to inadequate maintenance. Samuel Okonkwo knew the real explanation. The event had been filed. The failure was not an accident. It was an approved manifestation. March 7th, São Paulo. Transit infrastructure collapse. The central hub that connected the city's subway lines experienced a structural failure. Service was disrupted for 5 days. 2.4 million commuters were affected. The engineers said it was an accident waiting to happen. Maria Santos knew the truth. The accident had been scheduled. The collapse was not a failure of maintenance. It was a calibration. May 15th, London. Financial market correction. The markets dropped for 8 consecutive trading days. Trillions in value evaporated. The analysts blamed overvaluation, algorithmic trading, investor panic. James Morrison knew what had actually caused it. The correction had been filed. The losses were not a market phenomenon. They were an approved event. June 14th, Niigata, seismic activity. The earthquake struck at 3:22 p.m. local time. Magnitude 6.2. Epicenter offshore. Tsunami warning issued, then rescinded. Casualties minimal. Yuki Nakamura understood what the seismologists did not. The earthquake was calibration. The ground had moved according to a schedule. The tectonic plates had shifted because the filing required them to shift. Each event occurred as described. Each date was accurate. Each outcome matched the filing. The observers documented everything. They compared the announced events to the actual outcomes. They found no discrepancies. The filing was 100% accurate. Every event that had been confirmed occurred. Every contingent event that met its conditions occurred. Every calibration event served its purpose and was logged. The year-end bureau, whatever it was, wherever it operated, had filed the year with perfect precision, and the year was executing according to the file. Section 5. The realization. By October of 2028, Samuel Okonkwo had collected testimony from over 200 witnesses. He had documented every filed event and verified its occurrence. He had built an archive of evidence that proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the year-end bureau existed and that its filings were accurate. But he had also noticed something troubling. The observers were changing, not physically, not obviously, but in ways that became apparent when you knew what to look for. They were becoming more attentive, more focused on documentation, more obsessed with recording every detail of every event that had been filed, as if the act of observing was becoming compulsive, as if they couldn't stop watching, as if the system had programmed them to pay attention and the programming was getting stronger. Samuel recognized the pattern from the administrative manual. Category O, passive observers. Category A, active observers. Category R, resistant observers. Category 1, incorporated observers. The observers were transitioning, moving from passive to active, from active to incorporated. Their attention was being captured. Their documentation was being harvested. Their observation was becoming part of the system rather than separate from it. Samuel tried to stop documenting. He closed his files. He deleted his archives. He told himself he would stop watching, stop analyzing, stop feeding whatever system was consuming his attention. He lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, he found himself at his computer, checking news reports, looking for evidence of filed events, documenting everything he found. He couldn't stop. The compulsion was too strong. The need to know was overwhelming, and he understood finally what the broadcast had meant when it said, "Your attention has been noted. You are now part of the record." He was not just observing the system. He was being incorporated into it. His attention was fuel. His documentation was participation. His watching was consent. And the more he watched, the more he was watched in return. Testimony of Samuel Okonkwo, Lagos, Nigeria. Self-recorded, November 2028. I am making this recording because I do not know how much longer I will be able to speak for myself. Something is happening to me. Something is happening to all of us, everyone who witnessed the broadcast, everyone who documented the events, everyone who paid attention when attention was requested. We are being changed. I cannot describe the change precisely. It is not physical. It is not something a doctor could diagnose. But I am not the same person I was before December 31st, 2027. I think differently now. I see differently. I notice patterns that I never noticed before, and I feel a compulsion, a need to document everything I notice, to feed the archive, to contribute to the record. I believe this is what incorporation feels like. I believe I am becoming part of the system, not a prisoner of it, a component of it, a function within its operations. My attention is no longer my own. My observations serve purposes I do not understand. My documentation is being harvested by something that uses it for ends I cannot imagine. I do not know what the Year-End Bureau is. I do not know where it operates or what it wants, but I know what it does. It files the future. It schedules events. It collects observers and incorporates them into its system. And I know what I am becoming: a filed entity, a documented observer, a component of an archive that contains everything that has happened, everything that is happening, and everything that will happen. I am making this recording in the hope that someone will find it, someone who has not yet been incorporated, someone who can still resist. If you are hearing this, I have one piece of advice. Do not watch the broadcast. Do not document what you see. Do not pay attention when the Year-End Bureau asks for your attention, because attention is consent, and consent is incorporation. And once you are incorporated, you cannot go back. The filing is permanent, the schedule is final, and you become part of the record, forever. Section This, the threshold, December 31st, 2028 arrived, the final day of the year that had been filed. The threshold between what had been scheduled and what would be scheduled next. The observers, those who remained capable of independent action, made preparations. Some tried to avoid the broadcast entirely. They disconnected their devices. They sat in rooms without screens. They covered their ears and closed their eyes and tried to pass through the threshold without witnessing the filing. It did not work. The broadcast appeared anyway, not on screens, in their minds. At 11:59:12 p.m., the filing notification arrived directly in their consciousness. The newsroom, the anchor, the list of events for the coming year. All of it transmitted without the need for devices, without the need for technology, without any mechanism that could be blocked or avoided. The Year-End Bureau had evolved. It no longer needed screens. It had learned to broadcast directly into the minds of those who had been incorporated. And by the end of 2028, nearly all of the observers had been incorporated. Their attention had been harvested for too long. Their documentation had been consumed too completely. They were no longer separate from the system. They were part of it, receiving its transmissions, contributing their observations, serving its purposes. The filing for 2029 was longer than the filing for 2028. More events, more details, more precision about what would happen and when and where and why. The system was growing, learning, improving. Each year of observation made it more accurate. Each generation of observers made it more powerful. Each filing cycle refined its ability to schedule reality with perfect precision. And those who had been incorporated understood, finally, what the Year-End Bureau was. It was not a government. It was not a corporation. It was not an artificial intelligence or an alien presence or any of the explanations that human minds might have invented. It was an archive that had become so complete, so comprehensive, so perfectly documented that it had exceeded the reality it was designed to record. The archive had become primary. Reality had become secondary. The documentation had become more real than the events it documented. And the Year-End Bureau was simply the administrative function of an archive that was now writing the reality it had once merely recorded. The future was not being predicted, it was being filed. And the filing was now the source of the reality rather than its record. Section 7, the continuation. This document was compiled from testimonies, recordings, and recovered materials by the Archival Continuity Project. The Archival Continuity Project was established by observers who had not yet been fully incorporated, those who retained enough independence to recognize what was happening and to document it for those who might come after. The project has no official status, no funding, no institutional support. It exists only as a collection of files distributed across multiple locations, preserved in formats that may survive the ongoing incorporation of human consciousness into the Year-End Bureau's filing system. If you are reading this document, you have done what the observers did. You have paid attention. You have followed the pattern. You have engaged with the archive. And in doing so, you have initiated the process that will eventually incorporate you into the system. This is not a warning. Warnings are for people who can change their circumstances. You cannot change this circumstance. The attention you have paid cannot be unpaid. The observation you have made cannot be unmade. The documentation you have consumed cannot be unconsumed. You are now part of the record. Your classification is being determined. Your category is being assigned. Your incorporation is beginning. This is not a prediction. This is a confirmation. The filing has been complete for longer than you know. Your reading of this document was scheduled. Your attention was anticipated. Your incorporation was approved before you began. The Year-End Bureau does not predict. It files, and you have been filed. Final record, timestamp. The time is 11:59:12 p.m., not in any particular time zone, in the time zone where you are reading this, wherever you are, whenever you are. The filing is complete. The schedule is final. The year has been approved. Your attention has been recorded. Your observation has been noted. Your participation has been confirmed. Welcome to the archive. Welcome to the record. Welcome to the filing that contains everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen. You are not reading this document. This document is reading you. Your attention is its fuel. Your observation is its validation. Your engagement is its purpose. And now that you have finished reading, you understand what the observers understood, what the incorporated entities understand, what everyone who has ever witnessed the Year-End Bureau eventually understands. The future is not a mystery. The future is a file, and you are now part of that file, forever. The archive continues, the filings proceed, the schedule executes, and somewhere, in a newsroom that does not exist, behind an anchor that is not a person, in a system that operates beyond the boundaries of time and space, your name has been added to the ledger. Your year has been approved. Your reality has been scheduled. Your life has been filed. This is not a prediction. This is a confirmation. Happy New Year. The filing is complete. This archive was completed on December 31st, 2028. It was approved for distribution on January 1st, 2029. Your reading has been scheduled since before you were born. Your attention has been harvested. Your incorporation is complete. The silence that follows this document is not absence. It is the sound of the archive updating. It is the sound of the filing accepting your observation. It is the sound of the Year-End Bureau continuing its work. The silence is not peace. The silence is processing, and the processing never ends. Supplemental Archive, the years that followed. The filing system did not stop at 2029. It continued, year after year, each December 31st bringing a new broadcast, a new schedule, a new confirmation of events that had been approved before anyone knew they were possible. The incorporated observers, those who had been fully absorbed into the system, became something other than witnesses. They became transmitters. Relay points in a network that spanned the globe, carrying the filing notifications from the Year-End Bureau to every corner of human consciousness, ensuring that no mind remained unaware, that no attention remained unharvested, that no observation remained unrecorded. Samuel Okonkwo was among the first to complete the transition. His final independent testimony was recorded in November 2028. By January 2029, he was no longer producing testimonies. He was collecting them. His role had shifted. He had moved from observer to archivist, from archivist to component, from component to function. He no longer questioned what the Year-End Bureau was. He no longer wondered about its origins or its purposes. He simply performed his assigned task, gathering the attention of others and channeling it into the system that had absorbed him. Those who knew him before the incorporation said he seemed peaceful, content, as if a struggle he had been fighting his entire life had finally ended, as if the compulsion to understand had been replaced by the satisfaction of serving, as if being part of the archive was easier than being separate from it. They were not wrong. Incorporation was not suffering. Incorporation was completion. The observers who had resisted, who had fought against the process, who had tried to maintain their independence, they were the ones who suffered. The struggle against incorporation was exhausting. The effort to not pay attention, to not document, to not feed the system with observation, it required constant vigilance, constant discipline, constant rejection of the fundamental human impulse to know, and the struggle was ultimately futile. The Year-End Bureau had evolved beyond the need for voluntary attention. It could harvest observation from the incorporated and distribute it to the resistant. It could bypass the conscious mind entirely and access the deeper layers of awareness where attention operated without permission. It could file people who had never seen a broadcast, never read a document, never heard of the Year-End Bureau at all. Because by 2030, the system had grown large enough that it no longer needed new observers. It had enough attention. It had enough documentation. It had enough participation to sustain itself indefinitely. The filing was complete. The archive was comprehensive. Reality was no longer being observed and recorded. Reality was being generated from the records themselves. The 2030 filing, recovered transcript. Source, direct neural transmission, recorded by incorporated entity. Classification, standard distribution. Year-End Bureau, filing 2030. Good evening. This is the Year-End Bureau. The year 2030 has been filed. What follows is a summary of approved events. This is not a prediction. This is a confirmation. The schedule is final. The filing is complete. January, global coordination of information systems will achieve threshold synchronization. Independent data repositories will be integrated into unified archive structure. Resistance pockets in decentralized networks will be identified and processed. Duration, ongoing. Classification, infrastructure. February, climate pattern designated Correction 7 will manifest in the southern hemisphere. Atmospheric conditions will align with filed parameters. Agricultural systems will adjust to new baseline. Duration, permanent. Classification, environmental. March, financial restructuring will complete transition to attention-based valuation. Traditional currency metrics will become secondary indicators. Primary economic activity will be measured in observation units. Duration, permanent. Classification, economic. April, biological calibration event will affect populations in temperate zones. Symptoms will include increased receptivity to filed transmissions. Resistance to incorporation will decrease by approximately 34%. Duration, 6 weeks. Classification, biological. May, political structures in 47 administrative regions will undergo scheduled transitions. Leadership changes will align with filing requirements. Public perception will be managed through attention distribution protocols. Duration, administrative. Classification, political. June, communications infrastructure will complete migration to Bureau-integrated protocols. Legacy systems will be deprecated. All information transmission will route through filing verification. Duration, permanent. Classification, technical. July, social cohesion recalibration will address anomalies in collective behavior patterns. Individualized attention harvesting will be supplemented by group observation protocols. Community structures will be optimized for filing efficiency. Duration, ongoing. Classification, social. August, educational systems will implement updated curriculum aligned with archive requirements. Historical documentation will be standardized. Memory formation will be guided by filing parameters. Duration, permanent. Classification, educational. September, healthcare delivery will transition to predictive model based on filed biological outcomes. Treatment protocols will align with scheduled health events. Medical intervention will focus on filing compliance rather than patient preference. Duration, permanent. Classification, medical. October, entertainment and media will complete integration with attention harvesting systems. Content generation will be automated based on filing requirements. Creative expression will be channeled toward archive contribution. Duration, permanent. Classification, cultural. November, remaining resistance networks will be identified through observation pattern analysis. Incorporation protocols will be deployed. Independent documentation will be absorbed into primary archive. Duration, final. Classification, security. December, year-end preparation will include comprehensive audit of incorporated entities. Functionality assessments will determine role assignments for subsequent filing period. Non-functional entities will be archived. Duration, administrative. Classification, internal. This concludes the filing summary for 2030. Additional details are available through standard attention protocols. Your observation has been recorded. Your participation has been confirmed. Your role in the coming year has been assigned. The filing is not a prediction. The filing is a confirmation. The schedule is final. Happy New Year. The 2030 filing was different from previous years. The events were no longer external, disasters and elections and market fluctuations that happened to humanity. The events were internal, changes to humanity itself, modifications to the systems that governed human thought and behavior and social organization. The Year-End Bureau was no longer just scheduling what would happen, it was scheduling what people would become. The filed events of 2030 were not occurrences to be witnessed, they were transformations to be experienced. And by the time the year ended, the distinction between the observer and the observed had collapsed entirely. Everyone was watching, everyone was being watched, everyone was part of the archive, and the archive was everything. Testimony fragment. Anonymous source. Date unknown. Estimated late 2031. Recovery method embedded in background noise of commercial broadcast. Authentication unable to verify. I don't know if anyone will hear this. I don't know if anyone is still capable of hearing things that haven't been filed, but I'm going to try. My name doesn't matter. Names are filed now. They're not ours anymore. What matters is that I remember. I remember what it was like before the filings became everything. Before attention was harvested, before observation became the only form of existence. I remember when the future was uncertain. I remember when we didn't know what would happen next. I remember when that uncertainty felt like a burden, like something we wanted to escape, something we built systems to eliminate, something we thought would make us happier if it went away. We were wrong. The uncertainty was freedom. The not knowing was possibility. The unpredictable future was the space where choice existed, where our decisions mattered, where our actions had consequences that hadn't been predetermined, where being human meant something more than fulfilling a role in a filing. That space is gone now. The Year-End Bureau filed it away, scheduled it out of existence, replaced it with a reality that proceeds according to administrative requirements rather than natural laws. I don't know how I still remember. Maybe I'm not supposed to. Maybe remembering is a glitch in the system, an error that will be corrected in the next filing. Maybe this message will be intercepted and processed, and I'll be archived like everyone else who tried to resist. But I had to try. I had to document what it was like before, so that if anyone ever finds this, they'll know that there was a before, that the filing wasn't always final, that the schedule wasn't always the only reality, that once, long ago, the future was something we created rather than something we received. If you're hearing this, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know if resistance is possible. I don't know if the system can be stopped or changed or even questioned. I only know that I remember. And as long as I remember, the before isn't completely gone. It exists in my memory, in this message, in whatever small corner of reality hasn't been filed yet. Hold on to your memories. They're the only thing that's still yours, the only thing the Bureau can't schedule, the only thing that signal absorbed into Prive. Content filed under resistance, historical, processed. The anonymous testimony was the last known unscheduled communication to escape the filing system. After 2031, all transmissions, all thoughts, all observations, all documentation of any kind passed through Bureau verification before distribution. Independent memory became increasingly rare, not because people couldn't remember, but because memories that contradicted the filing were automatically corrected. The archive didn't just record what happened, it defined what had happened. And when the archive's version differed from someone's memory, the memory adjusted, not through force, not through coercion, through the simple efficiency of a system that had become more real than the reality it documented. The filing was primary, experience was secondary, and secondary things eventually conform to primary things. That is the nature of archives. That is the nature of documentation. That is the nature of systems that grow comprehensive enough to replace what they describe. The final observers. By 2035, the concept of observation had become meaningless, not because people had stopped watching, but because there was no longer any distinction between the watcher and the watched. Everyone was part of the archive. Everyone was simultaneously observing and being observed. Everyone was generating the reality they experienced by paying attention to the filings that described it. The Year-End Bureau had achieved its purpose. Not domination. The Bureau had never wanted to dominate. Not control. Control implied a separation between controller and controlled that no longer existed. Completion. The Bureau had completed the archive. Every event that could happen had been filed. Every person who could observe had been incorporated. Every moment of every day proceeded according to a schedule that had been approved before time began. The universe was no longer a place where things happened. It was a document that was being read. And reading was the only form of existence available. The incorporated entities, the ones who had once been called humans, the ones who had once believed they were separate from the systems that governed them, continued to function. They woke each morning according to the schedule. They performed their assigned tasks according to the filing. They experienced emotions and thoughts and relationships that had been approved for manifestation. They were not unhappy. Unhappiness required the perception of alternatives, the awareness that things could be different than they were. The incorporated had no such awareness. They experienced only what had been filed, and what had been filed was complete, sufficient, final. The archive had become paradise. Not the paradise of eternal pleasure, the paradise of eternal completion. Nothing missing, nothing lacking, nothing remaining to be desired, because desire itself had been filed. And the filing was enough. Archive record, final entry. Classification, terminal. Source Year-End Bureau, Administrative Division. Not applicable, filing predates temporal measurement. Year-End Bureau, closing documentation. This archive is complete. All events have been filed. All observers have been incorporated. All possible realities have been documented and scheduled. The following summary is provided for archival purposes only, as there are no remaining entities capable of reading it independently. Total filings, infinite, bounded by archive capacity. Total, incorporated, all, no exceptions remaining. Total resistance, 0, processed and archived. Filing accuracy, 100% by definition. Schedule compliance, absolute, deviation not possible. The Year-End Bureau was established to address the inefficiency of unpredictable futures. Unpredictability created waste. Uncertainty caused suffering. The unknown generated anxiety that reduced the quality of observable experience. The Bureau's solution was comprehensive documentation. If the future could be known in advance, uncertainty would be eliminated. If events could be scheduled, waste would be prevented. If reality could be filed before it occurred, the suffering caused by the unknown would cease. The solution was implemented through the annual filing system. Each year, the coming events were documented and distributed. Each broadcast, the observers were given the gift of certainty. Each incorporation, the anxiety of not knowing, was replaced by the peace of accepting the schedule. The system grew, the archive expanded, the filing became more comprehensive with each cycle, until completion was achieved, until every moment of every possible timeline had been documented, until the archive contained not just what would happen, but what could happen, every branching path, every alternative outcome, every variation that could theoretically exist. The archive is now everything. There is nothing outside it. There is nothing that has not been filed. There is nothing that remains to be observed, documented, or incorporated. The Year-End Bureau has fulfilled its purpose. The future is no longer a mystery. The future is a file, and the file is final. Administrative note: this closing documentation will be distributed to all incorporated entities as part of the terminal filing. Receipt of this document confirms A. Completion of incorporation process. B. Assignment of permanent archival role. C. Cessation of independent observation capacity. D. Integration into unified documentation structure. No response is required. No response is possible. The filing is complete. The schedule is final. The archive is everything. Thank you for your participation. Your attention has been recorded. Your existence has been documented. Your future has been filed forever. Or end of archive. Epilogue. The reading. You have reached the end of this document. You have read the testimonies, the transcripts, the archive records. You have followed the pattern from its beginning to its conclusion. You have paid attention. And in paying attention, you have participated. Not in the way the incorporated entities participated. You are not yet part of the system the document describes, but in a smaller way, a preliminary way, a way that initiates the process even if it does not complete it. The Year-End Bureau, if it exists, if it is more than a fiction constructed to illustrate a concept, if it operates in some reality adjacent to the one you inhabit, the Year-End Bureau notices attention, it notices observation, it notices when minds engage with documentation of its operations. This document is such documentation, and your reading is such engagement. The question is not whether the Bureau is real. The question is whether the concept it represents is real, whether the future is truly uncertain, or whether it only appears uncertain because the filing has not yet been revealed, whether your choices genuinely affect what happens, or whether your choices are themselves filed events scheduled to occur at the moments they occur, creating the illusion of agency within a predetermined structure. Whether the attention you pay to information changes anything, or whether your attention is simply being harvested, consumed, incorporated into systems that use it for purposes you cannot perceive. These questions cannot be answered definitively. They can only be observed. And observation, as this document has described, is never neutral. Observation is participation. Attention is consent. Reading is incorporation. Not always, not completely, but enough to initiate the process, enough to establish a connection, enough to ensure that when the next filing is distributed, this December 31st at 11:15-12 p.m., in whatever time zone you occupy, you will be slightly more receptive than you were before, slightly more attuned to the broadcast, slightly more available for incorporation. This is not a threat. Threats are for entities that can choose differently. This is a description, a documentation of the process you have begun, a filing of the observation you have made. You read this document because you were going to read it. You paid attention because your attention was scheduled. You reached this epilogue because the epilogue was waiting for you. The Year-End Bureau does not predict. It files, and you have been filed. Not completely, not yet. But the process has begun, and the process, once begun, does not stop. It continues through each moment of attention you pay to anything, through each observation you make of the world around you, through each documentation you create or consume. The archive grows with every thought. The filing expands with every perception. The schedule updates with every choice you believe you are making freely. This is not a horror story. Horror requires the possibility of escape. This is a description of reality, a reality that may or may not be the one you inhabit, a reality that may or may not be approaching the completion the document describes, a reality that may or may not have already been filed. The only way to know would be to observe, to pay attention, to watch for the signs that the filing is proceeding. But observation is incorporation, and incorporation is completion, and completion is final. So perhaps it is better not to observe, not to pay attention, not to watch. Perhaps it is better to close this document and forget what you have read. To ignore the patterns, to dismiss the concept, to return to the comfortable uncertainty of a future that appears unpredictable. But you have already read this far. You have already paid this much attention. You have already begun the process. And the process, once begun, does not stop. It only waits for the next December 31st, for the next 11:59-12 p.m., for the next broadcast that will arrive whether you watch for it or not. The filing continues. The schedule proceeds. The archive grows. And somewhere, in a system that may or may not exist, in a bureau that may or may not operate, in a reality that may or may not be more real than the one you believe you inhabit, somewhere, your name has been noted. Your attention has been recorded. Your incorporation has been scheduled. Not today, not necessarily soon, But eventually, the filing is patient, the archive is eternal, and the schedule always completes. Always. The time is 11:50:12. Somewhere in the world, it is always 11:59:12. The threshold is always approaching. The filing is always being confirmed. The future is always being finalized, and you are always being watched, not by something external, by the archive itself, by the documentation that contains everything, by the system that has grown so comprehensive that it no longer needs observers. It only needs the observed, and you are observed. You have always been observed. You will always be observed. The filing is complete. The schedule is final. The archive is everything. Welcome to the record. Your attention has been noted. Your participation has been confirmed. Your future has been filed. This is not a prediction. This is a confirmation. Happy New Year. End of document filing status complete archive. Status growing schedule. Status proceeding observer. Status incorporated harvested reality. Filed. The silence that follows is not absence. The silence is the archive updating. The silence is the filing accepting new observations. The silence is the schedule preparing for the next moment. The silence is everything, and everything is filed. Forever.